Then a millionaire left the safe open to test his assistant. 2 hours later, he couldn't believe what he witnessed. The autumn rain lashed against the windows of Kensington Square as Lord Richard Harrington observed his new assistant from behind his copy of the Financial Times. At 67, after decades building his business empire across Britain and beyond, the silver-haired industrialist had developed a profound distrust of those around him. His piercing blue eyes, still sharp despite his age, followed Emily Watson's efficient movements as she organized documents in his home office. 6 months ago, his previous assistant had betrayed him spectacularly, selling sensitive information to his greatest competitor. That betrayal had cost him millions, and more importantly, had wounded his already fragile capacity to trust. Now, Richard had devised a test for Emily, who had been working for him for barely 3 months. "I've an urgent meeting at Canary Wharf," he announced, setting down his newspaper. "I shan't be back until late afternoon." Emily nodded, her auburn hair catching the light as she looked up from her laptop. "Shall I reschedule your 4 o'clock?" "With the Tokyo investors." "Please do," Richard replied, reaching for his umbrella. As he adjusted his bespoke suit, he accidentally left his wall safe unlocked behind the constable painting, its door slightly ajar. Inside lay family jewels, confidential documents detailing his next acquisition, and a substantial amount of cash. What Emily didn't realize was that discreet cameras installed throughout the townhouse would record her every move, feeding directly to Richard's mobile phone. The old businessman stepped out into the rain with a mixture of cynicism and hope fluttering in his chest. Perhaps this time would be different. Emily noticed the open safe almost immediately after Lord Harrington departed. She crossed the Persian carpet, her sensible heels silent on the thick pile, and stood before it for a moment. Her fingers twitched, slightly at her sides as she peered inside, seeing the glint of jewels and stacks of papers marked "Confidential." After a brief hesitation, she simply closed the safe door with a gentle click, ensuring it was properly locked, and returned to her desk. Miles away, in the back of his chauffeur-driven Bentley, Richard frowned at his phone screen. He had expected something more. Perhaps she had spotted the cameras. His suspicion, honed through decades of corporate warfare, wouldn't be so easily assuaged. Upon his return to the office in Mayfair later that day, Richard left another test, a folder marked "Ultra Confidential Cayman Accounts" on his desk, alongside a sticky note with what appeared to be his computer password. He then announced he needed to step out again for a meeting with his solicitor. 5 hours later, when Richard finally returned to his office for the day, he found everything immaculately organized. The confidential folder was neatly placed in his locked drawer. The sticky note had been shredded, and Emily had not only resisted the temptation to snoop, but had also brilliantly handled a crisis with their Birmingham factory. Fair potential industrial action had been averted, thanks to her quick thinking and diplomatic intervention. That evening, breaking all his usual protocols, Richard invited Emily to dinner at the Ivy. Over grilled Dover sole, he observed her more carefully. She was perhaps 40, with lines at the corners of her eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. Unlike the polished Oxbridge graduates he typically employed, there was something refreshingly authentic about her. "How did you manage to solve the Birmingham situation so quickly?" he asked, genuinely curious. Emily smiled modestly. "My father was a union man in Sheffield. I understand how important dignity is in these discussions." As the evening progressed, Richard learned that Emily was a widow who single-handedly supported her elderly mother and a son with special needs. Her husband, a promising architect, had died of cancer 5 years earlier, leaving her to rebuild their lives from scratch. "Integrity isn't just a professional quality for me, Lord Harrington," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "It's how I show my son what matters in life." Something shifted in Richard's chest, a wall beginning to crumble. Overport, he confessed to the test he had set, expecting outrage. Instead, Emily nodded thoughtfully. "I understand," she said simply. "When you've built something meaningful, you must protect it." In the taxi home, Richard realized he had shared more about himself in one evening than he had with anyone in years. Something about Emily's straightforward manner had bypassed his usual defenses. Over the following months, their professional relationship evolved dramatically. From employer and assistant, they became genuine colleagues. Emily revealed a natural aptitude for business that repeatedly impressed Richard. Her innovative approaches revitalized stagnating companies within the Harrington Group. Where Richard saw problems through the lens of his extensive experience, Emily brought fresh perspectives that complemented his own. They developed a rhythm of productive disagreement, his traditional approach balanced by her more progressive ideas. Together, they navigated complex negotiations with a synchronicity that became the talk of London's business circles. But not everyone celebrated this partnership. On a rainy Wednesday in March, Richard's daughter Victoria returned unexpectedly from New York. Intelligent and fiercely protective of her inheritance, Victoria had been managing the American branch of Harrington Industries. Her return coincided with her father's growing reliance on Emily, and from their first frosty introduction in Richard's Thameside penthouse, the hostility was palpable. "She's remarkably comfortable in her position," Victoria commented acidly after meeting Emily, her cut-glass accent sharpening with displeasure. Richard dismissed his daughter's concerns, but the seeds of conflict were sown. Victoria, accustomed to being her father's closest confidant, found herself increasingly sidelined in business discussions, where Emily's opinion was now valued and sought. The situation deteriorated when Victoria discovered her father had given Emily authority to sign off on transactions up to £5 million, a privilege previously reserved only for family members. Hurt and suspicious, Victoria began to undermine Emily's position, subtly at first, then with increasing boldness. Documents Emily had prepared would mysteriously develop errors before reaching Richard. Appointments would be rescheduled without her knowledge. Rumors began circulating among staff about her alleged affair with a married board member. Emily noticed the campaign against her, but chose to rise above it, focusing instead on her growing responsibilities. Her restraint only seemed to inflame Victoria's resentment further. The conflict reached its breaking point when Victoria presented her father with apparent evidence of financial impropriety. According to the doctored documents, Emily had been directing small but significant sums to an offshore account through a complex web of transactions. "She's stealing from you, father," Victoria insisted, her voice trembling with what appeared to be concern, just like Jeremy did. The mention of his previous assistant, whose betrayal had nearly destroyed a significant portion of his business, struck a raw nerve. Richard, who had finally lowered his guard with Emily, felt the familiar sting of betrayal anew. He confronted her in his office overlooking St. James's Park, his voice cold with renewed suspicion. "Explain these discrepancies." Emily, stunned by the accusations, denied any wrongdoing. "These figures have been manipulated," she insisted, her normally composed demeanor cracking under the weight of his distrust. "I would never betray your confidence, Lord Harrington." But the damage was done. Richard, falling back on old habits, distanced himself immediately. He restricted Emily's access to sensitive information and began micromanaging her work. The easy rapport they had developed froze over, replaced by formal exchanges and tense silences. Emily, devastated by this reversal, but determined to clear her name, began working nights to investigate the alleged financial irregularities. Her modest flat in Clapham became command central for her investigation, its living room walls covered with financial statements and transaction records. Her son, Jamie, watched with concern as his mother worked herself to exhaustion. "Mum, is everything all right?" he asked one night, finding her still awake at 3 in the morning. Emily managed a tired smile. "Just a puzzle at work I need to solve, love." Her persistence was one of her defining qualities, a dogged determination that had seen her through her husband's illness, the challenges of raising a child with special needs and rebuilding their lives afterwards. Now that same quality drove her to uncover the truth, even as her professional reputation hung in the balance. After a week of meticulous analysis, Emily discovered subtle patterns in the manipulated documents. All the alterations had been made from a single workstation, Victoria's computer. But before confronting anyone, Emily needed absolute certainty. She stayed late one evening, long after most staff had departed, hoping to find conclusive evidence. As she worked in the darkened office, voices from the adjacent conference room caught her attention. Through the partially open door, she witnessed Victoria speaking urgently on the phone. "I can't let her take my place," Victoria was saying, her voice strained. "You don't understand. He's talking about giving her equity in the company." Equity. She's known him for less than a year. The conversation revealed the true motivation behind Victoria's sabotage, not malice, but fear. Fear that her father was replacing her not just in business, but in his affections. Fear that the empire she had been raised to inherit was slipping from her grasp. Emily stepped away, her mind racing. She had what she needed to clear her name, but exposing Victoria would only deepen the rift between father and daughter, a rift she had inadvertently helped create. That night, Emily made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. Instead of presenting her evidence to Richard, she developed a brilliant proposal for expanding the company's sustainable energy division, Victoria's area of expertise. The next morning, she approached Victoria directly. "I've been working on this proposal," Emily said, placing the folder on Victoria's desk. "But it needs your knowledge of the American market to succeed. I'd like us to present it to your father together." Victoria's suspicion was evident. "Why would you want my help?" "Because it's a good idea," Emily replied simply. "And because your father deserves to see what you're capable of." The presentation was scheduled for the following week. Emily deliberately downplayed her own contributions, highlighting Victoria's expertise instead. Richard, seeing his daughter's genuine talent showcased so effectively, began to thaw towards her after months of strained relations. Just as this tentative truce was forming, a crisis emerged that threatened the entire Harrington group. A hostile takeover attempt was detected, spearheaded by Richard's oldest rival, Sir James Blackwood, working in tandem with Jeremy, Richard's former assistant. The attack targeted Harrington's newly vulnerable renewable energy holdings. Emily noticed the pattern first, subtle movements in stock purchases that suggested a coordinated effort. But Richard was unreachable, flying back from meetings in Singapore with communications temporarily disabled for security reasons. With no time to waste, Emily and Victoria were forced into an uneasy alliance. "We need access to the contingency files," Victoria said, pacing the crisis room they had established. "They're in Father's private safe at the house." "The combination?" Emily asked. Victoria hesitated, then admitted, "I don't have it. He changed it after the incident with Jeremy." The irony wasn't lost on either woman. The same safe that had once been part of Emily's test was now crucial to saving the company, and neither of them could access it. Working around the clock, the two women pieced together the extent of the conspiracy. It wasn't just a takeover attempt. Blackwood and Jeremy planned to dismantle the company entirely, selling its most valuable assets while destroying its reputation, through a coordinated media campaign targeting Richard's personal life. Victoria uncovered evidence that Jeremy had been gathering compromising information on her father for years. Meanwhile, Emily's financial acumen revealed the sophisticated structure of the attack. Blackwood was using shell companies to disguise his acquisitions. In those intense days, something shifted between Emily and Victoria. Grudging respect began to replace hostility, as each recognized the other's commitment to protecting Richard and his legacy. When Richard finally returned to London, he found his office transformed into a war room. Emily and Victoria presented their findings together, finishing each other's sentences as they outlined both the threat and their proposed counter-strategy. "We've already initiated preliminary defensive measures," Victoria explained, "and prepared for injunctions against 3 of Blackwood's shell companies," Emily added. Richard listened in astonishment as they demonstrated how they had not only identified the threat, but had begun to neutralize it. In that moment, he saw something he had missed before, how complementary their strengths were and how powerful they could be when aligned rather than opposed. The crisis averted, Victoria finally confessed her sabotage to her father. I altered the financial records, she admitted, her voice small. I was afraid of losing you to her. Richard's face darkened with disappointment, but before he could respond, Emily intervened. She was protecting what matters to her, Emily said quietly. I understand that better than most. The revelation of Victoria's deception and the collaborative triumph over Blackwood's takeover attempt created a crossroads for all three individuals. Richard, shaken by how close he had come to losing everything, not just his company, but the trust of two women who had proven their loyalty, retreated to his cottage in the Cotswolds to contemplate the future of both his business and his relationships. While he was away, an uncomfortable truce settled between Emily and Victoria as they continued managing the aftermath of the crisis. They worked in the same spaces, but maintained a careful distance, the weight of unresolved tensions still hanging between them. On a rain-soaked Friday evening, as both women worked late at the office, a power outage plunged the building into darkness. Trapped together on the 30th floor, with emergency generators providing only minimal lighting, they found themselves sharing the same small space with no distractions to buffer their interaction. He'll never fully trust me again, will he? Victoria finally broke the silence, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable in the dim light. Emily considered her words carefully. Your father is a man who has been betrayed many times, but he's also a man who loves his daughter more than his company. How can you be so forgiving? Victoria asked, genuine bewilderment in her voice. I tried to destroy you. Emily's laugh held no bitterness. My husband spent 3 years dying. It teaches you what battles are worth fighting. For the first time, Victoria saw beyond her own fear and resentment to recognize the depth of the woman before her. Tell me about him, your husband. As the rain lashed against the windows, Emily shared stories of her life before Harrington, Industries, her marriage to an idealistic architect, their dreams cut short by his diagnosis, the challenges and joys of raising Jamie alone. In turn, Victoria revealed her own struggles living in the shadow of her brilliant, demanding father, her failed marriage to a man who had wanted her only for her family connections, her determination to prove herself worthy of the Harrington name. He never needed to test your loyalty, Emily observed. You've always been loyal to him. Perhaps that's why he tested yours instead, Victoria replied thoughtfully. When emergency crews finally restored power hours later, something fundamental had shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, but a mutual recognition that had been missing before. The following week, Richard summoned them both to his country home, a 17th-century manor house nestled in the rolling Cotswold Hills. They arrived separately, but entered the grand oak-paneled study together, finding Richard standing before the fireplace, looking older and more contemplative than either had seen him before. I've made some decisions, he said without preamble, about the future of Harrington Group. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. Outside, rain began to fall again, drumming against the leaded windows. Victoria, he turned to his daughter first, your actions disappointed me deeply. You betrayed my trust and attempted to sabotage someone who has shown nothing but loyalty to this family. Victoria's face paled, but she held her father's gaze steadily. However, Richard continued, in the crisis that followed, you demonstrated the leadership and strategic thinking this company will need in the future. He paused. I'm appointing you Chief Strategy Officer, effective immediately. Victoria's expression betrayed her shock. Father, He held up his hand. You will work directly alongside me for the next 5 years, not as my daughter, but as my colleague. You will earn the right to lead this company. He then turned to Emily. As for you, Emily stood tall, her face composed despite the uncertainty of her position. You came into my life when my ability to trust was at its lowest ebb. You passed every test I set and then faced one I never intended, Victoria's antagonism. A rare smile softened his features. And yet, when you discovered her betrayal, you chose reconciliation over revenge. From his desk, he retrieved a leather portfolio. I'm appointing you Chief Operating Officer of Harrington Group with a 5% equity stake in the company. Emily's professional composure finally cracked. Lord Harrington, I can't possibly. "Richard," he corrected gently, "I think we're well past formalities." "This is too generous," she protested. "It's not generosity. It's recognition of your value." He handed her the portfolio. "There's something else, a trust fund for Jamie's future care, regardless of whether you continue with the company." Tears filled Emily's eyes as the implications sank in. Her son's future security was now assured, removing the fear that had shadowed her since her husband's death. Victoria watched this exchange, complex emotions playing across her face. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "She deserves it, Father." Richard looked between the two women, his daughter raised in privilege but now beginning to understand the responsibilities that came with it, and Emily, who had overcome tremendous hardship without losing her fundamental decency. In that moment, he made a third decision, one he hadn't planned. "There's one more thing," he said, moving to the antique safe built into the wall of his study. Unlike the modern one in his London office, this was a family heirloom dating back generations. The heavy door swung open to reveal not money or documents, but a single velvet box. "This belonged to your mother," he said to Victoria, removing a platinum and sapphire ring. "She always intended for you to have it when you were ready." Victoria stared at the ring she had admired throughout her childhood. "I'm not sure I am ready," she admitted, the simple statement marking a new honesty between them. "You're beginning to be," Richard replied. "That's enough for now." Then, reaching back into the safe, he retrieved a second box. "And this," he said, turning to Emily, "was my grandmother's. She was not born into wealth, but married into our family during a time when such marriages were scandalous. She faced tremendous opposition with grace, and eventually won over even her harshest critics." He opened the box to reveal an elegant emerald pendant. "I would like you to have this as a symbol of your place in Harrington Group and in our family." As the rain continued outside, illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning, the three stood in a moment of transition. The old hierarchies were giving way to something new, a partnership that honored the past while creating space for the future. The following days saw rapid changes within Harrington Group. Richard announced the new leadership structure to shocked board members, some of whom had known Victoria since childhood and regarded Emily with suspicion. The business press buzzed with speculation about Richard's motivations, with some suggesting his age had finally affected his judgment. These external pressures forced Victoria and Emily into a more public alliance. Standing together at press conferences, presenting united strategies to the board, they built a working relationship that gradually evolved into genuine respect. For Richard, watching this transformation brought an unexpected peace. For the first time in decades, he began to consider a life beyond the constant demands of business. He started delegating more responsibilities, taking occasional afternoons to visit galleries or attend concerts, simple pleasures he had denied himself for years. The definitive test of their new arrangement came 6 months later, when Blackwood made another move against Harrington Group, this time targeting their shipping division with a legitimate purchase offer well above market value. Richard, Victoria, and Emily gathered in the crisis room once more, but the dynamic was different now. Instead of Richard directing the response with Victoria and Emily implementing his decisions, all three engaged as equals, their different perspectives creating a more robust strategy. "He's overextended," Emily noted, reviewing Blackwood's recent acquisitions. "This offer is leveraged beyond what his companies can sustain." Victoria nodded in agreement. "If we counter by purchasing these smaller freight companies," she indicated several points on the digital map, "we not only strengthen our position, but force him to reveal his financial weaknesses." Richard, listening to their analysis, felt a curious lightness. For the first time, he could envision a future where Harrington Group continued to thrive without his constant oversight. The plan they developed was bold but calculated. Richard would publicly appear to consider Blackwood's offer, while Victoria and Emily quietly executed a series of strategic acquisitions that would make Harrington's shipping division too integral to global supply chains for any regulatory body to approve. Its sale. The gambit succeeded brilliantly. Within weeks, Blackwood withdrew his offer, his own company's stock price suffering as the financial press questioned his judgment. The victory celebration in Richard's penthouse overlooking the Thames marked a turning point. As champagne flowed and the London skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Richard found himself observing rather than participating in the strategic discussions continuing around him. Emily noticed his withdrawal first. "Is everything all right?" she asked, joining him by the windows. "Perfect," he replied truthfully. "For the first time in 40 years, I believe Harrington Group could survive without me." The significance of this statement wasn't lost on Emily. For a man who had defined himself through his company for decades, this represented a profound shift. Later that evening, after most guests had departed, Richard called Victoria and Emily to his private study. There he shared his most significant decision yet. "I'm stepping back from daily operations," he announced, effective immediately. Victoria's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. "You're retiring?" "Evolving," Richard corrected with a slight smile. "I'll remain as chairman, but operational decisions will rest with you two as co-CEOs." The proposal was unprecedented, not just for Harrington Group, but in London's traditional business environment. A father's daughter and a former assistant, neither with the pedigree that such positions typically required, elevated to jointly lead a multi-billion-pound corporation. "The board will resist," Victoria said, her analytical mind immediately identifying the challenges. "Let them," Richard replied with unexpected steel. "It's still my company. Besides," he added more gently, "they'll come around when they see the results." "And if we disagree?" Emily asked pragmatically. Richard chuckled. "You will, frequently and productively. That's precisely the point." As the reality sank in, both women recognized the magnitude of what Richard was offering. Not just positions, but genuine trust. After a lifetime of guarding his company jealously, he was willingly placing it in their hands. Victoria was the first to respond. Crossing to the drinks cabinet, she poured 3 measures of Macallan 25, her father's preferred scotch for momentous occasions. "To Harrington Group," she said, handing glasses to her father and Emily. "Past, present, and future." The 3 crystal glasses clinked in the warm light of the study, sealing their new covenant. In the weeks that followed, their new arrangement faced its first serious test when Jeremy, Richard's former assistant who had allied with Blackwood, approached Victoria privately with damaging information about her father. In exchange for a substantial payment, he offered evidence of tax irregularities from the company's early days that could potentially trigger criminal investigations. Victoria listened to his proposition without reaction, then asked him to wait while she considered the offer. Instead of calling her father or consulting with the company's solicitors, she went directly to Emily's office. "We have a problem," she said simply, and laid out Jeremy's blackmail attempt. Together, they developed a response that protected both the company and Richard while neutralizing Jeremy's threat permanently. Rather than paying him off or engaging in counter-blackmail, they used their resources to offer him legitimate employment with a Harrington subsidiary in Australia, far from London and under careful supervision. "Why are you showing me this mercy?" Jeremy asked when they presented the offer. "We're not," Victoria replied coolly. "We're showing it to the man my father once trusted. Prove that man still exists, and this opportunity is genuine." When they finally informed Richard of the situation after it was resolved, his response surprised them both. There was no anger, no fear about the potentially damaging information, only appreciation for how they had handled it. "You protected the company without compromising its integrity," he noted. "That's the true Harrington legacy." 1 year after Richard's decision to step back, Harrington Group hosted its annual charity gala at the Victoria and Albert Museum. The event had always been a highlight of London's social calendar, but this year carried special significance as Richard's first public appearance in months. Emily found herself unexpectedly nervous as her car pulled up to the museum's entrance. Despite her position as co-CEO, she still sometimes felt like an outsider in these glittering social events. Her simple midnight blue gown, though elegant, was a stark contrast to the designer creations that adorned most female attendees. As she climbed the steps, Victoria appeared beside her, resplendent in emerald silk. "Ready to face the lions?" she asked, offering her arm in a gesture that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Inside, the museum's grand hall had been transformed. Beneath soaring Victorian arches, London's elite mingled among displays, highlighting Harrington Group's charitable initiatives. The transformation of the company's public image, from Richard's cutthroat corporate machine to a more balanced organization with strong ethical commitments, was Victoria and Emily's most significant achievement to date. When Richard arrived, a hush fell over the crowd. At 68, he looked different, more relaxed. The perpetual tension that had marked his features softened. He moved through the gathering with genuine warmth, no longer the isolated figure of previous years. The formal dinner passed pleasantly, but it was Richard's after-dinner speech that transformed the evening from social obligation to meaningful celebration. "Some of you have known me for decades," he began, standing confidently before the assembled guests. "You've watched me build Harrington Group with single-minded determination. Many of you probably wondered if I would ever let go, if I could ever trust anyone enough to share what I had created." He paused, his gaze finding Emily and Victoria at their table. "I wondered the same thing myself." Richard described the moment he had left his safe open as a test for his new assistant, a story that drew surprised laughter from the audience. He spoke of his daughter's jealousy and subsequent growth, of Emily's integrity in the face of temptation and accusation. With surprising candor, he shared his journey from isolation to trust. "A year ago, I made the best decision of my career," he concluded. "I placed Harrington Group in the hands of two extraordinary women who have since led it to its most profitable and purposeful year in history. But more importantly," his voice softened, "I gained something I thought I had lost forever, a family." The applause that followed was genuine, but it was the private moment afterwards that truly marked how far they had come. In a quiet corner of the museum, away from the crowds, Richard presented both women with small boxes. "These are the keys to my cottage in the Cotswolds," he explained. "I've had it divided into two separate residences on the same grounds. It's yours whenever you need escape from London, together or separately." The significance wasn't lost on either woman. The cottage had always been Richard's sanctuary, the one place he had never allowed business associates or even casual friends to visit. "Are you sure?" Victoria asked, genuinely moved. "Absolutely," Richard replied. "Though I do expect Jamie will take over the gardens," he added with a wink to Emily. "That boy has a remarkable gift with plants." As the evening drew to a close, the three found themselves on the museum's terrace overlooking the city. London stretched before them, a constellation of lights against the night sky. The rain that had threatened earlier had cleared, leaving the air fresh and full of possibility. "Did you ever imagine this outcome when you first closed that safe?" Richard asked Emily curiously. She smiled, the emerald pendant he had given her catching the light. "Not for a moment. I was simply doing what felt right." "Sometimes that's enough," Victoria observed, her relationship with Emily now comfortable enough for genuine friendship. The right action at the right moment. As they stood together in companionable silence, each reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Richard, who had spent decades building walls between himself and others, had finally found security in connection rather than isolation. Victoria had discovered that her worth wasn't measured solely by her father's approval or her position within his company. And Emily, who had faced life's harshest challenges with quiet dignity, had found not just financial security, but genuine belonging. The following morning, the business pages carried photographs from the gala, alongside glowing reports of Harrington Group's latest quarterly results. But it was a smaller, more personal picture that captured the essence of their transformation. Richard, Victoria, and Emily laughing together, their formal reserve temporarily forgotten, united not just by business interests, but by something far more valuable: trust, freely given and honestly earned. In his Mayfair apartment, Richard clipped this photograph and placed it on his desk, beside the much older image of himself signing the papers that had established Harrington Group 40. Years earlier, the contrast between the two pictures told its own story, from solitary ambition to shared purpose, from suspicion to faith. The safe behind his office painting remained closed these days, its contents no longer the measure of what he most valued. The true treasures he had discovered weren't those that could be locked away at all,